What if the beacon that guided sailors safely home for centuries also served as a lighthouse for the lost souls trapped between worlds? What if the echoes of childhood laughter and tragic accidents linger, not just in memory, but as tangible, chilling presences? In St. Augustine, Florida, America's oldest city, stands a historic lighthouse, a majestic structure with a dark and heartbreaking past. This isn't just a tale of old stones and salty air. It's a profound, emotional journey into one of the most actively haunted locations in America. This is the story of the St. Augustine Lighthouse and the spirits who forever call it home. St. Augustine, Florida, is a city steeped in history, its cobblestone streets and ancient fortresses whispering tales of centuries past. It is the nation's oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement, a place where the weight of history is palpable. Dominating the skyline of Anastasia Island just off the coast is the iconic St. Augustine Lighthouse. Standing at 165 feet tall, with 219 winding steps leading to its powerful lamp, it has guided ships safely through treacherous waters since 1874, but for many, this isn't just a navigational aid. It's a beacon for the paranormal, a focal point for the restless dead. The land upon which the current lighthouse stands has a much older history. It was previously the site of a watchtower and then a smaller lighthouse constructed in the early 19th century. This previous structure was eventually consumed by the encroaching ocean, but not before witnessing its own share of tragedy and loss. The current lighthouse, built to replace its crumbling predecessor, was meant to be a symbol of progress and safety. Yet, from its earliest days, it became entwined with heartbreaking accidents and unexplained phenomena, sowing the seeds of its haunted reputation. The most poignant and often cited tragedy occurred during the construction of the lighthouse itself. In 1873, the daughter of the lighthouse superintendent, Hezekiah Pittee, along with two daughters of assistant lighthouse keeper William Hahn, were playing on the construction site. 8-year-old Eliza Pittee and 5-year-old Mary and 4-year-old Eliza Hahn were playing on a cart used to haul building materials. The cart, unstable and heavy, suddenly broke loose, sending the three little girls plummeting into the deep well beneath. They drowned before anyone could reach them. This unspeakable loss, the sudden extinguishing of innocent lives, cast a permanent shadow over the lighthouse, sealing its fate as a place of sorrow. From that moment on, the lighthouse began to acquire its reputation. Visitors and staff alike reported hearing the distinct sounds of children's laughter and whispers coming from the tower, particularly near the very bottom, close to where the well was located. The feeling of being watched, the sensation of tiny hands tugging at clothes, and the fleeting glimpses of small, shadowy figures darting around corners became common occurrences. Many believe these are the restless spirits of the three little girls, forever playing in the place where their lives were so tragically cut short, forever bound to the stone and iron of the lighthouse. The tragedies did not end there. In the early 20th century, a lighthouse keeper named Peter Rasmussen died from a fall while painting the tower. His ghost, a tall, shadowy figure in a uniform, is reportedly seen still tending to the light, patrolling the catwalk, and performing his eternal duties. The smell of his cigar, long since extinguished, is sometimes reported on the grounds. Another tragic incident involved a lighthouse keeper who in the 1890s reportedly died of a stroke at the top of the tower, his spirit now a silent guardian of the light. Each death, each moment of despair, seemed to imprint itself onto the very structure, amplifying its connection to the spectral realm. The St. Augustine Lighthouse has become a prime destination for paranormal investigators and ghost hunters from around the world. Numerous teams have visited the site, bringing with them sophisticated equipment designed to detect the unseen. And almost universally, they have reported astounding results. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, have captured disembodied voices, often those of children, uttering playful phrases or responding to questions. Cold spots, dramatic fluctuations in temperature are frequently recorded, sometimes moving through a room as if an unseen entity is passing by. Objects have been witnessed moving on their own, and strange lights have been observed within the tower when no one human is present. The lighthouse keeper's house, now a museum, is also a hotspot of activity. Staff and visitors have reported seeing a shadowy female figure, believed to be the spirit of a former keeper's wife, staring out from the windows. Doors inexplicably open and close, alarms are triggered without cause, and the scent of old perfume sometimes wafts through the rooms. The intense energy is not confined to the tower. It permeates the entire property, a constant reminder of the lives lived and lost within its historical embrace. One of the most common and chilling experiences reported by visitors is the sound of disembodied laughter coming from the lantern room at the very top of the lighthouse. It's a joyful, innocent sound, yet utterly terrifying when there is no living child present. Other visitors have described feeling an unseen presence brush past them on the winding staircase, or even feeling a gentle tug on their clothing, as if a small child is seeking attention. These intimate personal encounters are what truly cement the lighthouse's reputation as a place where the past is still very much alive. But what is the nature of this haunting? Are these truly the spirits of the deceased, forever bound to the place of their joy and sorrow? Or is there something else at play, a residual energy from intense emotional events, played back like a cosmic recording? Skeptics argue that many phenomena can be attributed to natural causes: the sounds of the wind, the creaking of an old structure, the power of suggestion in a historically rich environment. Yet, the sheer consistency of the reports, the personal experiences that transcend simple explanations, continue to defy easy debunking. The St. Augustine Lighthouse has embraced its haunted reputation, offering popular ghost tours that delve into its chilling history. It serves as both a historical landmark and a bridge to the spectral realm, a place where visitors can connect with the past in a truly unique and unsettling way. The revenue generated by these tours helps maintain the lighthouse, ensuring its continued preservation for future generations of both the living and, perhaps, the dead. The story of the St. Augustine Lighthouse is more than just a series of spooky anecdotes. It's a profound meditation on loss, legacy, and the thin veil between worlds. It's a place where the vibrant energy of the living intertwines with the lingering presence of the dead, creating a unique and captivating tapestry of history and mystery. As the light from its mighty lamp continues to pierce the darkness, guiding ships safely to shore, it also illuminates the enduring enigma of those who remain, forever watching from the shadows, forever calling the St. Augustine Lighthouse their eternal home. The echoes of laughter and the soft whispers of unseen hands continue to drift through the salty air, a constant reminder that some stories and some souls never truly fade away. What if the house you bought to raise your family in, your dream home, turned out to be a place where the dead don't rest? A place where a malevolent spirit, centuries old, has already claimed the land and everyone on it as her own. This isn't the plot of a Hollywood movie, though it did inspire one of the most terrifying films ever made. This is the true story of the Perron family, who for nearly a decade lived in a state of siege, tormented by an unseen evil in a remote Rhode Island farmhouse. It is a story documented by the most famous paranormal investigators in history, a case so disturbing it became their most infamous secret. Our story begins not with a scream, but with a dream. In the winter of 1970, Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 young daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, found what they believed to be the perfect home. The Arnold Estate, a sprawling 200-acre property in Harrisville, Rhode Island, was a slice of colonial paradise. The The Old Brook Farm, as it was known, was a historic 10-room farmhouse, weathered by time, filled with rustic charm, and promising a peaceful, idyllic life. They were a happy, loving family looking for a place to put down roots, a place to watch their children grow. They had no idea they were moving into a place where roots had already been put down, roots of darkness that ran deep into the soil and into the very history of the land itself. The first signs were subtle, easy to dismiss. A broom that would move on its own, sometimes sweeping dirt into a neat pile only to disappear when someone went to get a dustpan. Small piles of dirt appearing in the middle of a freshly cleaned kitchen floor. The sounds of someone whispering in an empty room. The children spoke of seeing spirits, but they were not frightening at first. They described them as gentle, almost friendly. One was a young boy who would push their toy cars. Another was a kind old woman they called Auntie, who would sometimes tuck them into bed and give them a good-night kiss on the forehead. The parents, though unsettled, tried to rationalize it. An old house makes old noises. The imaginations of 5 young girls can run wild. They wanted to believe their new home was a place of peace, but the house had other plans. The atmosphere began to shift, like a slow-moving cold front descending upon the farm. The gentle spirits became less frequent, replaced by a tangible sense of dread. A foul odor like rotting flesh would inexplicably fill a room and then vanish just as quickly. Doors would slam shut with violent force. The beds would levitate a few inches off the floor as the children slept in them. Roger Perron would often go down into the cellar, a dark, earthen-floored space that always felt unnervingly cold, only to feel an icy, menacing presence behind him, as if something was waiting for him in the shadows. He once found a strange, non-functioning furnace had sealed itself shut, and when he tried to pry it open, he heard a demonic voice roaring at him from within, telling him to leave. The true heart of the haunting, the epicenter of the evil, soon made herself known. Her name was Bathsheba Sherman. Carolyn Perron began researching the history of the property and uncovered a dark and disturbing past. Bathsheba had lived on the land in the 19th century. She was a practicing Satanist, a witch who had been accused of sacrificing her own infant child to the devil with a large sewing needle. Though she was never convicted due to a lack of evidence, the townspeople ostracized her. She lived a long and miserable life, dying in 1863. The coroner's report was chilling. Upon her death, her body had inexplicably turned to stone. The legend was that she had cursed the land, vowing to torment anyone who tried to live there. She considered herself the mistress of the house, and any woman who dared to take her place would be driven out, or driven to madness. Bathsheba's torment focused on Carolyn. She saw Carolyn as a rival for the position of mistress of the house and the mother of the children. The attacks became personal and violent. Carolyn would be pinched, slapped, and pricked with a large, unseen needle, leaving painful, circular wounds on her body. One of the most terrifying events occurred one night as she was resting on the sofa. She felt a sudden, excruciating pain in her calf. Looking down, she saw a perfectly circular puncture wound, bleeding profusely, as if a large sewing needle had been driven deep into her muscle. Bathsheba's presence was a constant, suffocating weight, a spectral figure with a broken neck, her head hanging grotesquely to one side, who would appear at the foot of her bed at night, whispering the same chilling words, "Get out, get out. I'll drive you out with death and gloom." The 5 girls were not spared. They were tormented nightly by different spirits. Christine would often be visited by a tall, terrifying man with a crooked smile who would tell her that the spirits were going to kill her family. Cindy was haunted by the repeated vision of a little girl who would cry out in the night about 7 dead soldiers buried in the walls of the house. Indeed, Roger Perron would later discover the remains of several Revolutionary War soldiers buried in shallow graves on the property. The house, it seemed, was not just haunted, it was a container for lost and tormented souls, all held captive, by the malevolent will of Bathsheba. The family was at its breaking point. They were physically and emotionally exhausted, prisoners in their own home. They had little money and nowhere else to go. Their story was so unbelievable that they were afraid to tell anyone, fearing they would be seen as crazy. But the escalating violence, particularly towards Carolyn, forced them to seek help. In 1974, after years of suffering in silence, they attended a lecture by a husband and wife team who were gaining notoriety for their work with the paranormal. Their names were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed was a self-taught demonologist, the only one recognized by the Vatican. Lorraine was a gifted clairvoyant, able to see and communicate with the spirits of the dead. Together they had investigated thousands of hauntings. When the Perrons approached them, the Warrens knew immediately that this was not a simple haunting. This was an infestation controlled by something inhuman. They agreed to investigate the case, unknowingly stepping into what Ed Warren would later describe as the most intense, disturbing, and dangerous investigation of their entire career. When the Warrens arrived at the Perron farmhouse, Lorraine was immediately overwhelmed. As she walked through the front door, she was hit by a wave of psychic energy so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. She described the house as being saturated with evil, a portal through which entities could pass into our world. She saw the spirits that haunted the family, but she also saw the dark entity that controlled them all, Bathsheba. Lorraine saw her as a withered, terrifying hag, her face a mask of pure hatred, her presence a physical manifestation of evil. Ed Warren began documenting the case, conducting extensive interviews with the family and setting up recording equipment to capture evidence. The entity responded with fury. Objects were thrown across the room, the demonic voices grew louder, and the physical attacks on the family intensified. The Warrens knew that a simple house blessing would not be enough. They were dealing with a powerful, inhuman spirit, a demonic force that had latched on to Carolyn. The only solution, they believed, was an exorcism. But an exorcism required the official sanction of the Catholic Church, something that was rarely given, the climax of the haunting, the event that would scar everyone involved for the rest of their lives, occurred one terrifying night in the cellar. The Warrens decided to conduct a séance, a dangerous gambit to try and make contact with and expel the entity. It was a terrible mistake. The séance acted not as an expulsion but as an invitation. The demonic force of Bathsheba, enraged by the intrusion, focused all of its power on Carolyn. In front of her terrified husband, her children, and the paranormal investigators, Carolyn's body began to contort. She was thrown violently across the room as if by an unseen giant. A deep, guttural voice, ancient and full of hate, began to speak from her mouth, uttering obscenities and threats in a language no one could understand. Her body levitated, her chair rising with her, and she was hurled against the cellar wall. It was a full-blown possession. Andrea, the eldest daughter, who was secretly watching the terrifying events unfold from the kitchen, would later describe it as the night she saw her mother die. In that moment, she was certain a demon had taken her. Roger, seeing his wife being brutalized, ordered the Warrens to leave. He was terrified that the séance was not helping, but was in fact going to kill Carolyn. He threw them out of the house, believing they had made everything infinitely worse. The exorcism was never completed. The Warrens left, defeated and deeply disturbed by what they had witnessed. Ed Warren would later state that the events of that night in the Perron farmhouse were so traumatizing that he refused to speak about the case for years. The Perron family was left alone once more with the evil in their home. But something had changed after that horrific night. The paranormal activity, while still present, seemed to lessen in intensity. It was as if the demonic entity, having shown its full power, had retreated, perhaps satisfied with the terror it had inflicted. The family would continue to live in the house for 6 more years, until they were finally a On a quiet, moonless night in 1912, evil crept into a small, God-fearing town in the American heartland. It moved silently through the unlocked doors of a family home, and with a single, brutal weapon, it extinguished 8 lives in their sleep. Then, as quietly as it came, it vanished, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror, a town paralyzed by fear, and a mystery that over a century later remains one of the most chilling and impenetrable cold cases in American history. This is the story of Villisca, Iowa, a town forever haunted by the shadow of the axe. Villisca, Iowa, in the early 20th century, was the very picture of rural American tranquility, a community of just over 2,000 people, where faith, family, and hard work were the cornerstones of life. It was a place where neighbors trusted each other, where children played freely in the streets, and where the concept of a violent crime was almost unthinkable. At the center of this community was the Moore family, Josiah, a successful and respected businessman, his wife Sarah, and their 4 bright, happy children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. They were, by all accounts, the embodiment of the American dream, a family admired and loved by all who knew them. The evening of Sunday, June 9th, 1912, was a joyful one for the Moore family and for the town of Villisca. The local Presbyterian church was holding its annual Children's Day program. Sarah Moore had been the lead organizer, and all her children, along with many others from the town, were performing. The church was filled with proud parents and the sounds of laughter and song. After the program, the Moores walked home with 2 young friends of their daughter Catherine, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who had been invited for a sleepover. The 10-minute walk through the quiet streets was filled with the cheerful chatter of children, tired but happy after their big night. No one could have possibly imagined the profound and absolute horror that was waiting for them. The next morning, Monday, June 10th, the town began to stir with its usual routine. But at the Moore residence, there was an unnatural silence. Mary Peckham, their next-door neighbor, noticed that the house was unusually still. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of the family starting their daily chores. By 7:30 a.m., her concern had grown into a palpable sense of dread. She tried knocking on the door, but there was no answer. She tried to peer through a window, but could see nothing. Alarmed, she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross arrived and, after his own unanswered knocks, used his spare key to open the front door. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was terribly wrong. The house was cold and quiet, the air thick with a coppery smell he couldn't place. He opened the door to the downstairs guest bedroom and was met with a scene that would forever be seared into his memory. On the bed lay the still forms of Lena and Ina Stillinger. A quick horrified glance was all he needed. He ran back out onto the porch, his face ashen, and told Mary Peckham to call the town marshal. Town Marshal Hank Horton arrived and proceeded to search the rest of the house. What he found would plunge the town of Villisca into a nightmare from which it would never truly awaken. In the master bedroom, he found the bodies of Josiah and Sarah Moore. Upstairs, in the children's room, were the bodies of the 4 Moore children. All 8 victims had been brutally bludgeoned to death with an axe as they slept. Their skulls had been crushed with such savage force that their faces were almost unrecognizable. The crime scene was a study in chilling, methodical madness. The killer had taken Josiah's own axe from the backyard and used it to commit the murders. After the act, the weapon was found leaning against the wall in the downstairs bedroom where the Stillinger girls lay. It had been wiped down, but not perfectly. A strange and unsettling detail was that the killer had covered the faces of all his victims with their bed linens after they were dead. Even more bizarrely, every mirror and reflective surface in the house had been covered with a cloth or a piece of clothing. Was this an act of shame? A strange ritual? Or the mark of a superstitious killer afraid of seeing his own reflection or the spirits of his victims? The killer had also performed a series of other strange rituals. A 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon was found on the floor of the downstairs bedroom, leaning against the wall next to the axe. A keychain had been dropped near it. A bowl of bloody water was discovered in the kitchen, suggesting the killer had attempted to wash his hands. He had also locked all the doors from the inside and taken the keys with him, making his escape through an unknown route. The investigation that followed was one of the most extensive and frustrating in Iowa's history. The town was gripped by a collective terror.
No one felt safe.
Doors that had never been locked were now bolted shut. Fathers sat up all night with shotguns in their laps, guarding their sleeping families. The killer could be anyone, a neighbor, a stranger, a ghost. The list of suspects was long and varied, a cast of characters from a grim detective novel. One of the first and most prominent was a man named Frank F. Jones, a powerful and influential state senator and Josiah Moore's former employer. Josiah had worked for Jones for years before leaving to start his own rival farm implement business, a move that had created significant animosity between the two men. Rumors also swirled of an affair between Josiah and Jones's daughter-in-law. The theory was that Jones had hired an assassin, a man named William Blackie Mansfield, to eliminate his business rival. Mansfield was a suspected serial killer, believed to be responsible for a string of similar axe murders across the Midwest. He was even in the area at the time of the Villisca murders, but a grand jury failed to find enough evidence to indict either man. Another compelling suspect was a traveling preacher named Reverend George Kelly. He was an eccentric and often unnerving figure, known for his strange sermons and past history of mental illness. He had attended the Children's Day program on the night of the murders and had left town on an early morning train the next day. Years later, he would confess to the crime, providing details that seemed to match the crime scene. However, his confession was rambling and inconsistent, and he later recanted it. He was tried twice for the murders, but a hung jury in the first trial and an acquittal in the second left his guilt an open question. Was he a disturbed man confessing to a crime he didn't commit, or a cunning killer who slipped through the fingers of justice? Then there was the theory of the transient, the unknown drifter who simply passed through town, committed an act of pure, motiveless evil, and disappeared back into the vastness of the American landscape. Several witnesses reported seeing a strange man in town in the days leading up to the murders. This theory was perhaps the most terrifying of all, as it meant the killer had no connection to the town, no reason for his actions, and could therefore never be found. He was a phantom, a human monster who had chosen Villisca at random. As the years turned into decades, the case grew colder. The town of Villisca tried to move on, but the memory of that terrible night was a wound that would not heal. The Moore House, the site of the massacre, became a dark landmark, a place of local ghost stories and whispered legends. It passed through several owners, many of whom reported paranormal activity, the sounds of children crying, disembodied voices, and the overwhelming feeling of a malevolent presence. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House is preserved as a historical landmark and a site for paranormal investigations. People from all over the world come to spend the night, hoping to make contact with the spirits of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls, or perhaps even the dark entity that took their lives. It is a place frozen in time, a grim memorial to an unsolved crime. The mystery of who killed the 8 people in Villisca is a puzzle with too many pieces that don't fit. Was it a crime of passion and business rivalry? The act of a mentally unstable preacher? The work of a traveling serial killer? Or something else entirely? The covered mirrors, the slab of bacon, the covered faces, these strange rituals have never been adequately explained. They are the bizarre calling card of a killer who remains a ghost. The Villisca Axe murders are more than just a cold case. They are a dark piece of American folklore, a terrifying reminder that even in the safest of places, evil can be waiting just outside the unlocked door. Can a child's toy, an object of comfort and affection, become a vessel for pure evil? Can a doll stitched together from cloth and stuffed with wood wool develop a will of its own, a consciousness fueled by a century of dark energy? In a museum in Key West, Florida, locked away in a glass case, sits a 3-foot-tall doll dressed in a sailor suit. His name is Robert. He has glassy black bead eyes that seem to follow you, and a stitched-on smirk that feels less like a smile and more like a threat. Visitors are warned to treat him with respect, to ask his permission before taking his photo. Those who fail to do so often report a string of terrible luck: car accidents, job losses, broken bones, divorce. This is the story of Robert the doll, a child's plaything that has become one of the most feared and malevolent paranormal objects in the world. The story of Robert the doll begins in the year 1904. In the affluent Key West home of the Otto family. Thomas Otto was a prominent local doctor, and his wife Minnie was a society figure. They lived in a grand Victorian mansion, now known as the Artist House, with their young son Robert Eugene Otto, whom everyone called Gene. The origin of the doll is shrouded in mystery and dark local legend. The most common version of the story claims that the doll was a gift to young Gene from a Bahamian servant who worked for the family. This servant, it is said, was skilled in the arts of voodoo and black magic, and was deeply unhappy with her treatment by the Otto family. Before giving the doll to Gene, she allegedly placed a curse on it, infusing it with a malevolent spirit to exact her revenge on the family. Gene loved the doll instantly. He named it Robert, after himself, and the two became inseparable. Gene would take Robert everywhere, talk to him for hours, and even set a place for him at the dinner table. He began to insist that everyone call him Gene, as Robert was now the doll's name. At first, his parents found this endearing, a product of a child's active imagination. But soon, Gene's relationship with Robert took a disturbing turn. The Ottos would often overhear Gene in his room, having conversations with the doll. They would hear Gene's high-pitched voice, and then a second, deeper and guttural voice responding. When they would enter the room, they would find Gene terrified in a corner, insisting, "Robert did it." "Robert did it" became a common refrain in the Otto household. Toys would be found mutilated, furniture overturned, and valuables destroyed. Gene would always blame Robert, his face pale with genuine fear. Neighbors reported seeing the doll moving from window to window in the house when the family was out. Some even claimed to hear a sinister, childlike giggle coming from within the empty home. The Otto family began to experience the doll's malevolence firsthand. They would be awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of footsteps running through the upstairs hallways. They would find Robert sitting in a different chair than the one they had left him in. His expression seemingly changed, his smirk more pronounced. His bead eyes filled with a cold intelligence. The terror reached a peak one night when Gene's parents were woken by his blood-curdling screams. They rushed to his room to find it in complete disarray, with heavy furniture thrown across the floor. Gene was huddled in his bed, traumatized and crying, while Robert sat at the foot of the bed, staring at him with his blank, black eyes. It was after this incident that the Ottos decided they had had enough. They took Robert and locked him away in a chest in the attic. There he remained for decades, a dark secret hidden away from the world. Gene Otto grew up, became a successful artist, and after his parents passed away, he inherited the family home. One of the first things he did was go to the attic and retrieve his childhood companion. Despite the terror the doll had caused, Gene seemed to have a deep, unbreakable bond with Robert. He and his wife, Anne, moved into the house. Gene built a special room for Robert in the upstairs turret, complete with his own small chair and toys. He would spend hours alone in the room, painting with Robert by his side. Anne, his wife, was terrified of the doll. She hated it. She claimed she could feel its eyes on her, that she could hear it moving around at night. She insisted that Robert be locked back in the attic, but Gene refused. Their marriage was strained by the constant presence of the doll. Guests to the home would report feeling an unnerving presence, and some would claim to see Robert's expression change or see him blink. School children walking by the house would look up at the turret window and swear they saw the doll watching them, sometimes even tapping on the glass. Jean Otto died in 1974, and Anne sold the house shortly after, leaving Robert behind in the attic. The new family who bought the house had a 10-year-old daughter. One day, she discovered the strange sailor-suited doll in the attic and was overjoyed. But her joy soon turned to terror. She claimed that the doll was alive, that it would torment her at night, and that it had tried to attack her on multiple occasions. She would wake up screaming, claiming Robert was moving around her room. Even after more than 70 years, the doll's malevolence had not faded. Finally, in 1994, the doll was donated to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, where it remains to this day. But giving Robert a new home did not pacify him. It only gave him a larger audience. Museum staff immediately began to report strange occurrences. The doll would be found in different positions in its case in the morning. Electronic equipment would malfunction in its presence. Staff members would hear disembodied footsteps and childlike giggles after the museum had closed for the night. The legend of Robert the Doll grew, fueled by the stories of visitors who had experienced his wrath. The museum began to receive letters from people all over the world, apologizing to Robert for being disrespectful. The letters, which now fill several binders in the museum, are a chilling testament to the doll's alleged power. They tell stories of sudden illnesses, terrible accidents, and inexplicable runs of bad luck, all of which began after a visit to the museum where the writer had mocked or photographed Robert without permission. These letters of apology are now a part of the exhibit, a warning to all who come to see the haunted toy. So what is the truth behind Robert the Doll?
Is it merely an old, creepy-looking toy whose legend has been fueled by overactive imaginations and coincidence?
Or is it something more? Is it a vessel for a vengeful spirit, a demonic entity trapped within the cloth and wool? Is the voodoo curse real? Skeptics point out that the story has many variations and lacks concrete historical proof. But for the thousands of people who have stood before his glass case and felt the cold chill of his gaze, for the countless individuals who have written letters begging for his forgiveness, the evil of Robert the Doll is very, very real. He is a silent, smiling sentinel, a child's toy that serves as a terrifying reminder that some objects are not inanimate and some games should never be played. Did you know that a house in a picturesque Long Island town, a symbol of the American dream, became synonymous with pure, unadulterated evil? A house where, a year before a family fled in terror, another family was brutally slaughtered in their sleep. This isn't just a chilling tale told around a campfire. It's a saga woven into the fabric of American folklore, a story of murder, demonic possession, and a mystery that continues to haunt us. This is the story of the Amityville Horror, a house that screamed. The saga begins not with ghosts, but with a horrific crime. On November 13th, 1974, in the quiet, affluent community of Amityville and Long Island, police received a frantic call. At 112 Ocean Avenue, a Dutch colonial house with distinctive quarter-moon windows that seemed to watch the street like eyes, 6 members of the DeFeo family were found dead. Ronald DeFeo Jr., then 23, the eldest son, had murdered his entire family, his parents, Ronald Sr., and Louise and his 4 younger siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew. All were found shot in their beds, lying on their stomachs, a detail that baffled investigators and would later become a chilling footnote in the lore of the house. Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed he heard voices telling him to kill, voices from within the house itself, a prelude to the terror that was yet to come. DeFeo was eventually tried and convicted of the murders, claiming during his defense that the voices made me do it. He described a dark, oppressive presence in the house, a malevolent force that twisted his mind. While his claims were dismissed by the courts as a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility, they planted a seed of unease. Was it truly just the act of a disturbed young man, or was something far more sinister at play within the walls of 112 Ocean Avenue? The house, now vacant, sat on the market, its dark history a chilling shadow over its otherwise desirable location. Most people in Amityville wanted nothing to do with it, but one family saw past the bloodstains and the whispered legends. Just 13 months after the DeFeo murders, on December 18, 1975, George and Kathleen Lutz, a young couple with 3 children from Kathy's previous marriage, Daniel, Christopher and Missy, purchased the house. It was a beautiful home for a fraction of its market value, thanks to its grim past. George, a stern, hard-working man, and Kathy, warm and nurturing, were optimistic. They believed a fresh start, a new family in a house cleansed of its past, could turn the page. They were wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. They moved in on December 19th, blissfully unaware that they were stepping into a living nightmare that would strip them of their peace, their sanity, and nearly their lives. From the moment they crossed the threshold, a pervasive sense of cold, an unnatural chill, hung in the air. This was the first subtle manifestation. Then came the odors, putrid, sickening smells that no amount of cleaning could dispel, appearing and disappearing without source. Within days, the strange activity escalated. The quarter-moon windows on the 3rd floor, famously described as looking like eyes, would glow with an eerie red light at night. George, a non-believer in the supernatural, began to notice small, unsettling details. He was constantly cold, a chill that seeped into his bones, and a persistent craving for warmth led him to stoke the fireplace almost continuously, even in mild weather. He also found himself waking at 3:15 a.m. every night, precisely the estimated time of the DeFeo murders. Gripped by an inexplicable anxiety, the children, particularly Missy, began to report encountering an entity. Missy, the youngest, claimed to have an imaginary friend named Jody, a pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. While children often have imaginary friends, Jody's description was unsettling, and her influence on Missy grew increasingly sinister. Missy would talk to Jody for hours, her behavior becoming withdrawn and erratic. This was not the innocent play of a child's imagination. It was something far darker taking root. The other children also experienced strange phenomena, from hearing disembodied voices to feeling unseen presences in their rooms. One night, a crucifix, a gift from Kathy's mother, reportedly turned upside down on its own, dripping a black,
oily substance onto the floor. The house itself seemed to be alive, a malevolent entity with its own will.
Doors would slam violently, windows would open and close, and strange green slime oozed from the walls. Objects would move on their own, often thrown with force, barely missing family members. Kathy, initially a skeptic, found herself increasingly terrified. She began to have vivid, disturbing nightmares and felt a constant, oppressive presence around her, particularly in the living room where the fireplace was, a room that George seemed pathologically drawn to. She experienced cold spots, the sensation of being touched by unseen hands, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched, judged, and hated by an unseen force. Her personality began to change, becoming more irritable, withdrawn, and fearful. The family's attempts to find solace were met with resistance from the house. A priest, Father Ralph Pecoraro, whose name was changed to Father Ray Bolan in the books to protect his identity, was called to bless the house shortly after the Lutzes moved in. As he sprinkled holy water in the living room, he claimed to hear a deep, guttural voice command, "Get out!" He also suffered a high fever, blisters on his hands, and was reportedly plagued by strange phone calls and physical attacks upon leaving the house, further solidifying the family's belief that they were dealing with something truly demonic. The house was rejecting any form of spiritual cleansing. asserting its dominion over the property and its inhabitants. George Lutz, once a staunch skeptic, found himself increasingly under the house's influence. His behavior grew more aggressive, his appearance more disheveled. He would spend hours in the basement, tending to the furnace or sitting by the fireplace, drawn to the warmth, almost as if he were being slowly consumed by the house's cold, dark energy. He began to resemble Ronald DeFeo Jr. in his withdrawn nature and outbursts of anger. The family dog, Harry, became acutely distressed, barking incessantly at unseen figures and seemingly paralyzed by fear in certain areas of the house. Even the family cat developed a deep aversion to the living room and the notorious Red Room in the basement, a small, windowless space that exuded a profound sense of evil. The climax of their terror unfolded over a series of increasingly intense nights. The green slime became more widespread, oozing from electrical outlets and fixtures. George saw what he described as pig-like eyes staring at him from the darkness. Kathy claimed to levitate in her sleep, and the children were subjected to nightmares that blurred the lines between sleep and waking terror. One night, the distinct scent of cheap perfume filled the master bedroom, followed by the terrifying sight of Missy's bed slamming up and down on the floor. The family, particularly George, observed strange, swirling patterns of light and shadows, almost like spectral figures dancing in the periphery of their vision, mocking their attempts at normalcy. Perhaps the most horrifying event involved George's younger brother, Jim, and his wife Barbara, who had come to visit. While sleeping in the spare room, they were violently thrown from their bed. Jim described feeling an invisible force grab him and hurl him to the floor, leaving him bruised and disoriented. This incident removed any lingering doubt for Jim and Barbara. The house was undeniably and dangerously haunted. The experience of the Lutzes was not isolated. It was corroborated in part by visitors and by the increasing desperation in their voices and actions. After only 28 days of unimaginable terror, the Lutzes fled the house on January 14, 1976, leaving all their possessions behind. They ran for their lives, taking only the clothes on their backs. They never returned. Their harrowing account was documented in Jay Anson's best-selling book, The Amityville Horror: A True Story, which then spawned a hugely successful film franchise. The story captivated the world, but it also sparked intense controversy. Skeptics quickly emerged, challenging the Lutzes' claims and alleging that the entire story was a hoax, a money-making scheme concocted with William Weber, Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney, who allegedly sought to profit from the tragedy. Critics pointed out inconsistencies in the Lutzes' narrative, questioning the timeline of events and the verifiable evidence. Investigators and debunkers highlighted the lack of physical proof, such as photographs of the green slime or recordings of the demonic voices. They argued that many of the strange occurrences could be explained by mundane events, psychological suggestion, or even outright fabrication. The house itself, while old, did not have a documented history of severe paranormal activity prior to the DeFeo murders, and subsequent occupants claimed to experience nothing out of the ordinary, further fueling the skepticism. However, the Lutzes steadfastly maintained the veracity of their story until their dying days. They claimed to have undergone lie detector tests, which they passed, and pointed to the numerous individuals who witnessed some of the strange phenomena. They argued that the trauma they endured was far too real to be fabricated, and that the financial gains from the book and movie were overshadowed by the public ridicule and the lasting psychological scars. For them, it wasn't a story. It was a terrifying lived. What if the legends were true? What if the creatures of folklore, the monstrous beings whispered about in hushed tones, were not confined to ancient myths, but roamed the very highways and farmlands of modern America? In the rural heartland of Wisconsin, a chilling series of encounters beginning in the late 1980s suggested just that. Farmers, drivers, and townspeople reported sightings of a creature unlike any known animal, a bipedal, wolf-like horror straight out of a nightmare. This is the story of the Beast of Bray Road, Wisconsin's very own werewolf legend. Our journey into the unknown begins in the late 1980s in the peaceful, picturesque countryside surrounding Elkhorn, Wisconsin. This is a landscape of rolling hills, dense woods, and quiet country roads, where the biggest excitement usually involves a good harvest or a high school football game. But the tranquility of this setting was about to be shattered by something primal, something ancient, something that defied all logical explanation. It was here, on a remote stretch of gravel known as Bray Road, that the first chilling encounters took place, leaving witnesses shaken to their core and questioning their very sanity. The initial reports were sporadic, whispered rumors among locals. Drivers claimed to have narrowly avoided hitting a large, dark animal that darted across the road on two legs. Farmers spoke of strange tracks in their fields, too large for a wolf, too human-like to be anything else. But it was in the early 1990s that the sightings escalated dramatically, transforming from isolated incidents into a full-blown local phenomenon. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be making its presence known with increasing frequency and audacity, forcing the community to confront an impossible reality. One of the earliest and most vivid accounts came from a woman named Doris G. She was driving home late one night on Bray Road when her headlights illuminated a figure hunched
over a dead animal on the side of the road.
At first, she thought it was a person, perhaps a prankster in a fur coat. But as she slowed down, the creature stood upright, revealing its true, terrifying form. It was easily 7 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark fur, with a distinctly lupine head, pointed ears, and eyes that glowed in the reflection of her headlights. It stared at her with an unnerving intelligence, before casually loping off into the darkness on 2 powerful legs. Doris sped away, her heart pounding, convinced she had just encountered a monster from a horror film. Another chilling encounter involved a young woman named Lorianne Indrizzi in 1991. She was driving along a dirt
road near Bray Road when she felt her car hit something.
Stopping to check, she saw a large furry mass in her rearview mirror. As she got out, the mass began to stir. To her horror, a creature, described as a bear-like man with fangs, slowly began to sit up and then stood on its hind legs. It was massive, towering over her small car. Lorianne didn't wait to see more. She jumped back into her vehicle and fled, convinced she had narrowly escaped a predatory attack. The creature's powerful form, its terrifying rise from the ground, became a recurring motif in witness testimonies, emphasizing its uncanny strength and bipedal movement. The sightings weren't confined to fleeting glimpses in the dark. Several witnesses described prolonged encounters, face-to-face standoffs with the creature. A group of teenagers claimed to have been stalked by the beast while out exploring in the woods near Bray Road. They described hearing heavy breathing, the snapping of twigs, and the distinct sound of something large moving silently through the undergrowth, always just out of sight yet undeniably there. When they finally caught a glimpse, they saw its shadowy form, its red eyes reflecting the moonlight, moving with an eerie, almost supernatural stealth. The fear it instilled was palpable, a deep, primal terror that left them screaming and running for their lives. The local authorities initially dismissed the reports as hoaxes, misidentified animals, or the product of overactive imaginations. But as the number of credible witnesses grew and their stories consistently described the same impossible creature, the skepticism began to wane. Local newspaper reporter Linda Godfrey, then working for the Walworth County Week, began to investigate, collecting eyewitness accounts and publishing articles about the phenomenon. Her initial intent was to debunk the stories, but the sheer consistency and conviction of the witnesses soon led her to believe that something genuinely extraordinary was happening on Bray Road. Her book, The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf, became a cornerstone of the legend. The creature's appearance was consistently described as a bipedal, wolf-like or bear-like animal standing between 6 and 8 feet tall, with powerful hind legs, long claws, and often glowing red or yellow eyes. Its fur was typically dark brown or grey, sometimes shaggy, sometimes sleek. Its movements were often described as a combination of human and animal. It could run on all fours with incredible speed, yet stand and walk upright with a terrifying, almost intelligent gait. This hybrid nature, its defiance of biological classification, was what made it so terrifying and so difficult to comprehend. It was not just a large wolf, it was something else entirely. Theories abounded, each more fantastic than the last. Was it a cryptid, an unknown animal species yet to be discovered by science? Perhaps a variation of a North American werewolf, or dogman, a creature that appears in the folklore of many indigenous cultures and seems to be reported across various parts of the United States. Some suggested a genetic mutation, a runaway experiment, or even an escaped exotic animal. Others delved into the realm of the supernatural, proposing it was a demonic entity, a shapeshifter, or a manifestation of an ancient curse tied to the land. The more reports Linda Godfrey gathered, the more convinced she became that the witnesses were genuinely seeing something inexplicable. The Beast of Bray Road was not just a local curiosity, it became a national sensation. Cryptozoologists, paranormal investigators, and monster hunters flocked to Elkhorn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive creature. Television shows and documentaries featured the sightings, further cementing the beast's place in the pantheon of American cryptids. The community, initially fearful and dismissive, gradually embraced its strange legend. Bray Road became a destination for thrill-seekers and true believers, all hoping to encounter Wisconsin's very own monster. The sightings, while less frequent than the initial flurry, have continued sporadically over the decades. The creature remains elusive, caught only in the terrified memories of its witnesses and the blurry, indistinct photos and videos that offer tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. No body has ever been found, no clear scientific explanation offered. The dense woods and interconnected farmlands of Walworth County provide ample cover for a creature of its size and stealth, allowing it to move unseen and unheard, vanishing back into the shadows from whence it came. The Beast of Bray Road represents a unique intersection of local folklore, cryptozoological mystery, and genuine eyewitness terror. It challenges our understanding of the natural world, forcing us to consider that perhaps, in the hidden corners of our seemingly domesticated landscapes, primal horrors still exist. It's a testament to the enduring power of the unknown, a chilling reminder that even in the most ordinary places, the extraordinary can emerge, leaving behind a trail of fear and unanswered questions. The legend of the Beast of Bray Road continues to grow, a dark and furry shadow lurking on the edge of the American consciousness, waiting for its next appearance, waiting to remind us that not all monsters are confined to stories. What if a peaceful family vacation, a chance for rest and reconnection in the stunning beauty of California's Sierra Nevada mountains, ended in an act of unimaginable brutality, leaving a crime scene so baffling and a mystery so profound that it remains unsolved over 4 decades later? This isn't just a grim true crime story. It's a terrifying testament to the darkness that can lurk even in the most idyllic settings. This is the enduring, heartbreaking puzzle of the Keddy Cabin murders, a nightmare from which a small, close-knit community never truly woke. Our story takes us to Keddy, California, a small, remote resort town nestled deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the spring of 1981, Keddy was a picture of rustic charm, a tranquil escape surrounded by towering pines and crisp mountain air. It was the kind of place where families went to reconnect with nature and each other, a haven from the hustle and bustle of city life. Among those seeking solace and a fresh start was the Sharp family. Glenna Sharp, known as Sue, a kind and dedicated mother, had recently moved to Keddy with her 5 children from Quincy, California. They were living in Cabin 28 of the Keddy Resort, a quaint, wood-paneled dwelling that promised warmth and comfort. The night of April 11th, 1981 began like any other for the Sharp family. Sue, then 36, was home with her children, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina,
and 10-year-old Rick and 5-year-old Greg. Earlier that evening,
Sheila had gone to a friend's house in a neighboring cabin for a sleepover. Later, around 10:00 p.m., John Sharp and his friend Dana Wingate, 17, visited cabin 28. They watched television and spent time with the younger children. The atmosphere was calm, unremarkable. No one in the cabin or in the quiet resort community could have possibly imagined the unspeakable horror that would unfold in the coming hours, transforming cabin 28 into a tomb. The horrific discovery was made the following morning, April the 12th. Sheila Sharp, returning home from her sleepover, entered cabin 28. What she found would traumatize her for life and forever haunt the small resort town. In the living room, bound with medical tape and electrical cords, lay the bodies of her mother, Sue, her brother, John, and his friend, Dana Wingate. All three had been brutally murdered. They had been stabbed repeatedly with a kitchen knife and bludgeoned with a hammer. The scene was one of unimaginable savagery, a tableau of blood and violence that defied comprehension. As Sheila stood frozen in horror, she noticed something even more disturbing. Her younger siblings, Rick and Greg, were asleep in their bedrooms, miraculously unharmed. But her youngest sister, 12-year-old Tina, was gone, vanished. The discovery of the three bodies and the disappearance of Tina sparked a massive search and investigation. Plumas County Sheriff's deputies, overwhelmed by the brutality of the crime in their peaceful jurisdiction, called for assistance from the California Department of Justice. The small, close-knit community of Keddie was shattered, gripped by fear and a desperate need for answers.
Who could have committed such a heinous act and why?
The crime scene inside cabin 28 was a chaotic and deeply disturbing puzzle. The bodies were found in the living room, indicating a struggle had taken place there. John and Dana were found tied with electrical wire and medical tape. Sue was gagged with a bandana and her hands were tied with electrical cord. The medical tape used was a specific brand, New Skin, which was a detail that would haunt the investigation. The weapons used, a hammer and a kitchen knife, were found at the scene, bearing silent testimony to the ferocity of the attack. But despite the extreme violence, investigators found little else in terms of clear forensic evidence. The cabin appeared to have been partially cleaned, or at least disturbed after the murders, suggesting an attempt to obscure the facts or a killer who lingered at the scene. For months, the search for Tina Sharp continued relentlessly. Flyers were distributed, news reports broadcast her disappearance, and volunteers scoured the vast surrounding wilderness. But the mountains seemed to swallow her whole, offering no clues. It wasn't until 3 years later, in April 1984, that a grim discovery finally brought a semblance of closure, though no answers, regarding Tina. Her skull and several bones were found by a mushroom hunter at Camp 18, a remote logging camp nearly 100 miles from Keddie. The discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears. Tina had also been murdered. The investigation into the Keddie cabin murders was plagued by missteps and missed opportunities from the very beginning. The initial processing of the crime scene was heavily criticized. Crucial evidence may have been overlooked, contaminated, or simply lost in the chaos of a small department dealing with an unprecedented crime. Early leads focused on local transients and drug dealers, but these paths quickly dissolved into dead ends. The lack of a clear motive, the sheer brutality of the attack, and the bizarre disappearance of Tina made the case extraordinarily difficult to unravel. Several key suspects emerged over the years, many of whom were known to the Sharp family and lived in Keddie. One theory pointed to Marty Smart, a neighbor of the Sharps and a known volatile individual with a history of violence, who had a tense relationship with Sue. Another suspect was his friend, John Bubede, a drifter with alleged ties to organized crime. Both men were known to have been in Keddie at the time of the murders. Witness testimony placed them near cabin 28, and their behavior in the aftermath of the killings was suspicious. They allegedly boasted about their involvement and left town shortly after. However, despite intense suspicion, there was never enough concrete evidence to charge them. Another chilling lead involved a man named Bo Bubede, Marty Smart's associate. A letter found years later, written by Smart to his wife, reportedly contained a confession or strong implication of his involvement with the murders, stating that she needed to pay for what she did. The letter alluded to Sue Sharp and his wife being involved in an argument with fatal consequences. Yet, even with these potential confessions and highly suspicious activities, the case never moved forward to prosecution. The lack of political will, insufficient forensic resources, and what some describe as a deliberate obfuscation of evidence by local authorities contributed to the perpetual coldness of the case. The years passed, and the Keddie cabin murders became an enduring unsolved mystery, a source of constant pain for the surviving Sharp children and a chilling legend for true crime enthusiasts. The resort itself, once a vibrant getaway, slowly faded, the stigma of the murders hanging over it like a pall. Cabin 28 eventually fell into disrepair and was ultimately demolished in 2004, erasing the physical site of the horror, but doing nothing to diminish the questions that lingered. The absence of a clear resolution, the unknown identity of the killers, and the baffling circumstances surrounding Tina's disappearance continue to torment those who knew the family and those who have followed the case. Recent developments in the case have offered a glimmer of hope. In the 2010s, new investigators, including Plumas County Sheriff's investigator Mike Gamberg, began re-examining the evidence, applying modern forensic techniques to the decades-old clues. A new piece of evidence, a hammer found near the cabin in 2004, was confirmed to match the description of one of the murder weapons. DNA evidence from a piece of medical tape found at the scene was retested, yielding a partial DNA profile. This breakthrough suggested that the killers were known individuals whose DNA could potentially be matched. Despite these new leads, the case remains officially unsolved. The original suspects have either died or are uncooperative, and the passage of time has made gathering fresh evidence incredibly difficult. The Keddie cabin murders stand as a stark reminder of the limitations of justice, even in the face of such overwhelming tragedy. It is a story that speaks to the vulnerability of innocence, the enduring strength of a family's bond broken by unspeakable evil, and the chilling reality that sometimes, even in the clearest light of day, the darkest deeds can remain hidden, casting a long, cold shadow over the American dream. The questions remain: who slaughtered the Sharp family and Dana Wingate? What truly happened in cabin 28 that terrible night? And will justice ever be served for Sue, John, Dana, and Tina? The silent mountains of Keddie hold their secrets close, but the echoes of that horrific night continue to scream for answers.